Your right to vote up for debate in the courts. A federal judge blocked the Texas law that requires voters to show a photo ID in order to vote. We first told you about this last night at 9 o'clock. This law can have a big impact. The U.S. Justice Department estimates 600,000 voters in Texas do not have an ID. Even if you do have one, the ruling still affects you. Only 5 million votes were cast statewide in the 2010 midterm elections, and 600,000 votes would have made a big difference. But as KXAN's Lindsey Bramson explains, some people say this ruling will only confuse voters.
The more votes, the better.
Frances Martinez spent 40 years in East Austin before moving a few miles north. She does have a voter ID, but many of her friends and family don't.
Many of the residents, many of the older generation, they don't have an ID.
With so many friends still in these neighborhoods, Frances hopes the new ruling, which doesn't force voters to show ID, will bring more people to the polls.
This will at least encourage them to come and vote. And I think that with us helping them, letting them know, look, you can come to vote.
Julian Lamone Fernandez is a candidate for Austin City Council District 3. He thinks the new law will benefit him.
Not just for me, but for all the candidates. It brings, I would say, another 20% of people to come up and come out and vote.
However, not everyone agrees. In fact, some say it will only confuse voters more and could actually decrease voter turnout.
We've already had this be the law of the land for 2 elections running in Texas, and we haven't seen any impact on voter turnout of any race or any group.
But Frances says requiring an ID to vote would most definitely impact her group.
Our vote is our voice, and we need to exercise it.
So just how many Texas voters don't have an ID? Travis County estimates 37,000 people didn't have an ID during the last election. Williamson County doesn't have estimates, but an elections administrator there says right now nothing will change. They're waiting for official documentation, and until then they are telling voters you still need your ID in order to cast your ballot. Lindsey Bramson, KXAN News.
The Attorney General's office tells us it will appeal to the Fifth Circuit once the judge puts forward her official judgment. Once that appeal does go through, the Fifth Circuit Court could back the judge's decision and leave voter IDs out of the election. The court could also back the Attorney General's appeal and reinstate the voter ID law. In either case, both sides will likely consider appealing to the Supreme Court. If you think you need a new photo ID before Election Day, follow this link inside the story on KXAN.com for the mobile election identification cards. There are some really important dates to know in this election, too. Early voting kicks off on October 20th and wraps up on Halloween, October 31st. The general election will be Tuesday, November 4th. For a better look at the national implications of the ruling, I spoke with the host of NBC's Meet the Press, Chuck Todd, earlier today via satellite. If the Texas voter ID law remains invalid, what is that going to mean across the country?
What I think it could do is it could slow. There was a big movement, a big push in 2011 after Republicans won a bunch of governorships and a bunch of state legislatures to put these voter ID laws in. I think that some of them will end up staying. Part of me does think that this sort of this voter ID political fight that we've seen, and again, it got ramped up right in 2011 after a slew of Republicans won governorships and state legislatures. I think that it's going to go away. I mean, it seems to, that you're going to see more of the laws designed around states that haven't seen challenges where, yes, you'll show ID, but have an expansive definition of what an ID is that you need to show at the polls.
And tune in to NBC's Meet the Press this Sunday morning at 9 o'clock. That's right after KXAN State of Texas In Depth.